This is Cory Childs, Indiana Fiber Network. Good morning, and thanks for joining this is the second installment of Indiana Fiber Network's webinar series, where we're highlighting services, technologies, applications available to Indiana's healthcare networks, leveraging IRHA and the Indiana Telehealth Network. IFN is the host of the Indiana Telehealth Network shared platform, and we also, with our statewide fiber network, connect many of the rural healthcare networks and most of the state's larger hospitals with our high-speed fiber optic networks. And so with IRHA and IFN, we're hosting a 6-part webinar series through the end of the year. It's an educational series mostly focusing on telecommunications and information technology available to the healthcare industry, and we're highlighting infrastructure and applications that support the information technology needs of today's healthcare providers. And so with us, we've got on the call 2 experts in cloud and virtualization, Matthew Guillermo and Ben Forrester. Matthew and Ben will be guiding us through the importance of cloud security this morning. They're both with Expedient data centers. Expedient's headquarters in Pittsburgh, with data centers in Indianapolis and several other data centers in the eastern part of the United States. Matt and Ben, thanks for being with us here today. We'll turn it over to you so that we can better understand the importance of cloud security.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Cory. Pleasure to be here. Ben and I are excited to talk to you guys. We've viewed a lot of things going on in the industry and in the market specifically here in Indianapolis. And one thing that came up over and over again in regards to cloud computing and virtualization is the component of security and how secure one can be in the cloud. And especially when we talk about kind of the healthcare field and the requirements via HIPAA, PCI, a lot of those different things, how you play into that and what you should be concerned about or considering when approaching this new technology. So I'm going to hand things over to Ben. Ben is our solutions architect here at Expedient, and he'll run with it from moving forward.
Good afternoon, everyone. So let's just dive into the presentation. Just a little bit about my background too. My primary focus is security, so this is one of the topics that's near and dear to my heart. So with that, what we're going to talk about today is what really changed with architecture, why cloud security is not the same as other security practices, so as people and companies move to cloud, why you actually have to rethink the whole security posture. And then we're going to touch on just what we see as the top 10 cloud security risks as you move into the cloud, what to kind of think about, what to assess as you move forward. So with that, everyone kind of remembers what traditional networks look like. When we were building networks for the past 20, 30 years now, it was always very simple. It was physical servers with physical switches, physical firewalls that were connected to the internet. And everyone had kind of this basic idea. You had a bunch of standards that were built around it. You had certifications that were built around all the traditional network standards. And with that, we had all the security standards that were established and proven. But what happened when we started moving to virtual networks, a lot of things changed. You now have a hypervisor that's a single backplane with multiple systems running across it. You now have this concept of virtual switching on top of all your physical stuff, all connecting back out to the internet. So it became a much more complex issue for us because it also added another layer that we had to look at for security purposes. So what we'll talk about now is why cloud security isn't the same, and this is actually an email that we received at Expedient, and we receive these emails all the time, and this is why we actually vet our customers out here versus a more like swipe your credit card type model of service, because with traditional architecture, you always knew what systems you had, who your neighbors were, because it was always physical presence. So if you were in an office suite, you might have office suite 101, and you knew who your neighbor was in 102. With cloud security, that no longer is the case, and this is one of those emails that we get all the time. And these are usually from foreign countries where somebody is looking to set up some form of a web server or something like that that they can actually exploit by putting it in certain cities and pretending to be somewhere they're not. And that's why it becomes so critical that we actually vet out who customers are versus just having everyone sitting in the cloud together. Because those neighbors, those people that are sending those emails are actually attempting to exploit services that go back to the hypervisor layer. So they want to get access to your systems, and you no longer know who your neighbor is, so you don't know that they're actually knocking on your door. And what you see here listed in this slide is just a couple of the exploits that have come out since 2007. There's multitudes more, but these are some of the more prevalent exploits that people are actually trying to exploit, that whole hypervisor layer to access from one virtual machine to the next in the cloud. And a lot of times you don't even know this is going on because you don't have that control over your neighbors anymore. So that's really what changed with cloud security. That's why we actually kind of revamped the whole thought process of what cloud security is and why we had to come up with a different set of security risks versus your traditional security risks where it was just making sure you had firewalls, making sure you had IDS, IPS, things like that. So the first, number one on our top 10 cloud security risks is what's called account or traffic hijacking. And this is where everyone always says the same thing. I mean, your email providers, you see it on TV all the time. Everyone always says passwords are key. Too many users are always using the same password, and if you notice the Target exploits or Kohl's or any of the multitude of other vendors that are always asking you to change your passwords, Amazon just went through one of these for their web services front end stuff, where everyone was using the same password, so you get these emails that say change your password and then tie it back to your email. The biggest issue is so many of us have identical passwords for multiple systems, and once you have one, then you can start tracing through for companies and users for other passwords for them. And then once you have access to their email, it makes it much, much easier because every website always has that oblivious button that just says, you know, click me to send a password reset to your email. So that's why it's really critical and key to make sure, you know, passwords are very, very important, and make sure that your email password is different than every other password you have, and make sure that you have a really secure email account for that purpose. Number two is data breaches, and this is becoming much more prevalent because with all the current security risks, you have now things called side channel timing exposures, where it's actually multitudes of data is going through that virtual switch. And people are just listening for traffic coming off from that virtual switch, and they might not be able to pick up an entire piece of a conversation at one time, but now that your neighbors are sitting in that same cloud with you, they have all day. They have nothing better to do than sit there and just record information from you, and eventually they can piece it together and slowly get a picture of what your company looks like, what your encryption keys might look like, and eventually hopefully compromise one of your systems. So that's why you really got to watch out for it. And we've seen this a lot. This happens multitudes of different companies. I mean, especially Target was a great example of it because it wasn't necessarily, you know, the encryption of the data. It was just the endpoint for them. It was all their little terminals where your credit card swipes, but it also went back to the back end where it was a shared system that they compromised versus the actual cloud itself. Number three is data loss, which is important because what happens when you lose data, most companies don't realize this, but if you're down for more than 72 hours or you've lost data for more than 72 hours, more than 65% of companies actually go out of business after that point because they lose so much revenue over those couple days, and then you lose all the faith in your customers. So a lot of times it might take a year or two before you end up closing your doors, but you'll see that process continue to grow over time. And one of the neat things that Amazon actually had this happen to them, where they had elastic block storage, which had issues. And what happened is when they moved this storage from one side to another, so many customers moved at one time that it actually forced the storage to overfill in that case. So it became a data loss issue for them. So they were starting to drop customer information over and over again. And they actually coined a new phrase because of it, because of what Amazon was doing. So now we actually have the whole EBS data loss systems in place to prevent that. Another big issue is everyone wants APIs, which are application interfaces. These are pieces of code that make uploading virtual machines or copying code or interfacing with other systems much, much easier. The problem with these, in order for them to actually communicate with back-end systems, they all have to have some authentication method. whether it's a username password or an encryption key, something like that. And these are a nightmare for security because we have to try to manage all these different keys. And if one of those APIs ever actually gets out the behind-the-scenes pieces of it, that whole API then becomes compromised at that point, and we have to go back and rewrite an entire API. And in a lot of cases, we won't know about it right away because the people that do discover these vulnerabilities in APIs don't share this information for many, many years. And we've seen this happen quite often in other companies, especially now with cloud being more integrated, with everyone wanting integration stuff. If you're familiar with a lot of the blog websites, they actually use a program called WordPress. There was a vulnerability in WordPress's API that gave hackers access to behind-the-scenes data for basically everything on blogging sites that were built off from WordPress for years, and they sat on it for years before an actual security professional discovered it. So it's really, really scary to us because it becomes very important for how you understand how APIs are communicating, what the encryption keys look like. And then secondly, this actually it kind of goes back to even the original security. You know, 20 years ago we were still talking about malicious insiders are always a concern for us. You always have employees that want to steal data, or maybe a newly terminated employee that wants to do something malicious. This becomes much, much harder in the cloud because a lot of times you don't have the same security controls over your cloud services. So you have admins that not only have access to your physical network, they're in the office, but they also have access to this cloud environment. And in a lot of cases, they can create additional users or copy encryption keys or even share usernames and passwords for critical accounts because people don't want to pay for those additional services. So they try to be as cheap as they can going to the cloud. And what happens is when one of these malicious users, insiders, decides to actually take advantage of it, you don't have the tracking for it anymore. You don't have the ability to actually see all the logs that are happening when they access their system because the logs in the cloud don't report back to your traditional syslog or security event systems in a lot of cases. So it's really important to make sure that you keep track of the concept of once a user connects to the cloud from your physical environment, are you still tracking the same information both in the cloud as you would in your physical environment? The other big thing when we talked about these attackers, if you remember the email from several slides back when we were saying, knowing your neighbors and what's going on, cloud services gave those users the ability to actually use the same resources that you have. So everyone, if you remember 20 years ago, there used to be things called botnets, and actually there still are multitudes of botnets that you can go out to websites and purchase 100,000 machines that are compromised home PCs that can attack a website for a denial of service or a DDoS attack. With cloud services, they no longer have to do that. They can actually go out to Amazon, Azure, Rackspace, other companies like that, and actually just swipe their credit card and spin up hundreds of virtual machines for almost nothing to them, and then create multitudes of instances underneath that and literally become a legal botnet for them. They can actually use the power of cloud services to come back and attack your systems, and sometimes even on the same virtual machines, the same infrastructure that's being hosted. So they're not even having to cross the internet anymore. They're actually using the backbone fabric of a company to attack another company. And like we just touched on with denial of service, right? That's what they're actually doing in this case. They're trying to attack your companies. But the thing that I wanted to touch on with denial of service that makes it more prevalent now in the cloud is it's not just denial of service, because now you have bandwidth agreements, you have commitments for 100 megs of internet usage or 10 meg connection, something like that. Those connections can get throttled, and in a lot of cases they have a flexible model where you have burstable charges that can occur. And with a lot of these attackers, they don't even want the purpose of attacking your system for data. They just want to put your system under hostage, because at that point you're going to get a very large bill from multiple providers or your cloud provider saying, well, you are only committed to using 10 megs of bandwidth per month, and you're actually using 100 megabytes of bandwidth on a constant basis for several days, and that can be very, very expensive. So denial of service attacks are no longer just an impact to your business. They can actually be a huge impact to your financials without you even noticing it, just from all the additional traffic. That's why it's really important to ask your cloud provider, how are they handling denial of service attacks? If they do get attacked, is there an additional charge? Can they split the difference between those to actually say, denial of service traffic is completely dropped off and you'll never be charged for it, or do they not have a way to track that so then you become a victim? The next topic, as we've kind of already been alluding to, it's really know your cloud. And I know I've said it numerous times, but knowing the services you can get and cannot get and what security measures they actually have in place is extremely important, because in many cases they will have services for cloud providers, will have services in another data center or another cloud company. It's not even their original company, so the services you get are not the same services you can get from a larger cloud provider that actually hosts their own services and has their own equipment. And then making sure what security measures do they have in place. Do they have logging in place? Do they have additional firewalls? Do they have denial of service protection? Do they have application firewalls available? And the reason for this is as your company builds and grows, or as security expands, you need to have the ability to grow with your cloud provider, your data center, so that you know that they will grow with you. So always verify, what services they already have, what services they have planning, and then know what services you can't get so you can build your security infrastructure around that. So if they don't offer something like a security event management system, you can actually put one in place or expand your current internal system into the cloud to be able to pick up on stuff. Then shared technology becomes a big risk. So a lot of cloud providers, if you're not familiar with thin provisioning basically takes an allotment of actual physical storage and divides it up into smaller allotments. And the goal with this in many cases is that when one customer says they might need 20 gigabytes of disk, they're actually using maybe 10. So you give that 20 gigabytes to multiple different customers, and all together they equal the full 20, but each of them thinks they have 20 that they're just never using. So you can slowly grow disk as a cloud provider. The scary thing that started happening is now that expanded out into memory and CPU resources, so now we actually have what's called memory bleeding, where you leave remnants of things behind on your memory, or they over-allocate their systems so dramatically that when a large influx of customers comes in, like for example, Black Friday is a wonderful example of this for cloud providers, because it's actually why Amazon got into the cloud in the first place, because they bought all this hardware for the purpose of using it for Black Friday through the Christmas holiday season. Then later they realized they had all these additional resources sitting around. So that's actually what you're purchasing, is the resources that they normally provision and use during Black Friday through the Christmas season. And other providers jumped on board with that. Now the scary thing is if you are a web service provider or anything like that, where you have a lot of customers coming to your website at specific times, you can actually impact everyone else on your system, or other customers can impact you because of that purpose. So you want to make sure that your cloud provider isn't providing thin provisioning on their system. They should be able to have the ability to let you thin provision your own resources, but not doing it on their own, because if they're doing their own thin provisioning, it could impact you because other customers are obviously doing the same thing on their cloud platform. And lastly, one of the most important ones is accountability, because what we've noticed over the past 6 years of now doing cloud services, that using this pay-as-you-go credit card swipe type model is a perfect idea at first, because people can go out and spin up a resource, swipe their credit card, pay $100 a month or $200 a month for resources. But as more and more administrators, directors, and finance people start to realize they can go swipe their credit card, you lose control over your spending, and everyone goes out and spins up more resources. So your bill fluctuates a lot on a regular basis. And what we've noticed, we've had a lot of companies come to us and say, holy cow, my bill went from several $100s a month to thousands overnight, because everyone just decided, oh, I want to play with the machine, so I'm going to go spin one up in the cloud. That's why it's really important to find out how your cloud provider actually uses their services and how they bill back. Is there overage charges for everything you do? Is it a more flat monthly spend? Do they have a swipe your credit card type model? If not, the ones to really look for, especially for enterprises and larger companies, if you want to control spending, find the ones that don't allow credit card swiping services, because then you can actually control your bill on a regular basis. You can actually see that, I know my monthly bill will be X number of dollars unless I request to add additional resources. It wraps a box around your admins and your IT professionals that love to play.
You guys have anything else you'd like to mention before we wrap up the call?
No, I appreciate it. If there's anybody that's looking to kind of explore the data center world or go into more depth about, cloud virtualization, what that all means, and how it can be beneficial for their company, we'd be more than happy to bring any conversation offline for Expedient. Myself, Matt DeRamo, or Ben can facilitate that. So again, we just thank you for the time today and look forward to things to come.